Right, back live with you tonight. Cash-strapped power utility Eskom is still struggling to collect money owed to it by some municipalities. The municipal electricity debt runs into billions, with some of the biggest defaulters in arrears of over 7 billion rands each. Former executive manager at Eskom Vally Padayachee with me in the studio to help us understand this and navigate what actually is happening. 58 billion rand. This is the combined number of debt owed by municipalities in 2023. It might be a little bit more now. How do we get there?
A very good evening to you, Thabo, and a very good evening to yourself and to your viewers, and many thanks for inviting me to your show on this very cold and chilly night, Joburg night. Yes, that's an excellent question, and it's a fundamental question to hopefully, I hope that we can unpack the causes. Yes, 58 billion, there are a number of factors, what I call a number of direct causes, and in any crisis situation, I mean, this is a crisis situation. Yeah. I mean, let's not beat about the bush. But in any crisis situation, you have direct causes and you have root causes. Now, maybe just as a disclaimer, I want to try and give you a balanced view on this entire debt scenario vis-a-vis Eskom and the municipalities. And I'm not here to castigate Eskom and so on. But what I want to say is that I want to give you a perspective from the municipal side, and I've worked very close to the municipalities, and I'm still there. And we generally hear the side of Eskom, right? And also as a disclaimer, I think Eskom needs to be paid for the services they render, for the services that have been provided, and for the debt that is rightfully theirs. So you can see I'm very carefully selecting my words, because what I'm saying is that not all debt owed by the municipalities is the correct debt, in my opinion, as a general comment, that Eskom is requiring. And let me try and unpack that. So also as a disclaimer, I'm not saying that all municipalities are innocent. There are some delinquent municipalities, but in the main, there's a fundamental issue as to why municipalities are here. And if we don't address it, this problem is going to be exacerbated. Now, to start this conversation, let's take a step right back in 1994 at the dawn of democracy. Right. At the dawn of democracy, it may not be common knowledge to the rank and file, but South Africa, the democratic government, inherited almost a bankrupt state. Okay? And so the budget available at the time, my understanding, was very little to try and service the rest of the population that we left delinquent during the apartheid era. So about, I would say 85% of the population were derided in terms of services. Yeah. So when Tata Madiba took over, and in terms of the constitution, local government was seen as a vehicle to uplift the lives of people. And in fact, I think Tata Madiba called it a better life for all. So constitutionally, municipalities were seen as a vehicle to drive that. And from an electricity point of view, because it was electricity, water, and sanitation. So let's focus on the power, obviously, that's why I'm here. So on the power side, it was constitutionally municipalities to be assisted by Eskom. So it's not Eskom, it's municipalities that have that constitutional right to do that. Now, because of the limited budget available and almost a bankrupt state, the model envisaged by the democratic government at the time is kind of the user pay model, which is similar to what the first world does. In other words, what they envisaged very fundamentally
you pay after.
is that the municipalities would provide the services from self-funding it. Now, what do I mean by that? It means that they need to collect the operational costs for the services provided from the users, it's user pay.
Yes.
And so that was the fiscal framework.
Yes.
And in terms of the local government white paper, 1998, it was envisaged and it's said to be corrected about 73% of the operational cost to provide the services will come from the users. And the balance of 30-odd%, 27%, would come from government through the equitable share. So that's a fundamental model.
So are you saying that is the structure that's still in place
Fundamentally
today?
still. So
when the COGTA minister says to us, no, but they get grants, they get allocations and whatnot and so forth, those grants are only taking care of 27%.
27% fundamentally.
Yeah.
And that's also based on collections and revenue and the debt equity of the different municipalities.
Right.
So now we're getting to the challenges. So if you've got poor revenue collection, poor collections, poor debt management, then it affects your equitable share that you get from government. I'm keeping it very simple.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if your debt is increasing and so on, that equitable share is also decreased, very simplistically. So the user pay model, and we must not forget that the current load shedding for the last 2 or 3 years, which was worse before that, has also exacerbated the situation because municipalities, electricity utilities, need to get electrons and sell that to make money. Not to make profit, but to make money. If they don't do that, they don't collect revenues and so on. Load shedding has also exacerbated the economy, depression, job losses, etc. So the poor folk out there, majority, bearing in mind that South Africa has 95% poor people, can't pay. So given that situation, I would argue, supported by many, that I would say the majority of municipalities are virtual resellers of Eskom. Meaning, let me quickly explain that. If you look at a typical electricity utility of a municipality, their income statement reflects, I would also argue, 75% to 90% of cost of sales.
Yeah.
So the Eskom tariff
so when tariff goes up, they also go to
they're left with about 25 to 10% to run the businesses.
Yeah.
So that also exacerbates it. Okay? Yeah. So that's also probably...
So you are saying, while we're there, sorry, let me interrupt so
yes.
that we understand. You are saying that was not the design, that was not the plan. The plan is to say municipalities are supposed to, in a way, have an excess of electricity so they can be able to give to communities at a more reasonable cost. Right now, all they're doing is just getting from Eskom and passing it on. And whatever Eskom is charging them, they are adding their little markup and passing it on.
And that's 500% increase in the last 5 years.
Yes, yes.
Plus the munis have to put their cost in.
Yeah.
So the
and you're saying that is not how, well, that's how it's designed now, the model, but you're saying there is a better way in which this can be done.
Yes, because what's happening now is in business, whether it's private sector, public sector, the only way you can manage the business, I won't say make profit in government, you make a surplus and you keep your costs down.
Yes.
Now it's gone the other way around. Our income, the revenue has dropped, and the costs have gone through the roof.
Yeah.
So I would argue, and this is what I call the case for change, the burning platform, that the municipalities, including Eskom now, so Eskom's part of the pile, are going down a debt spiral. And the problem statement is, how do we arrest that, right? So from the Eskom side, they get bailouts, significant bailouts from Eskom. They have access to the RCA account from the regulator. Munis don't have that luxury. So I would argue that the fundamental model, because there's two things that drive a municipal business, even an Eskom business. You get organizational factors and you get structural factors. And those determine the operational and financial performance. But the structural factor is the root cause, and I'm going back to my original statement, and the root cause which government can only fix, not Eskom, not the municipalities, is the operating model. So the operating model of the user pay principle, where the 73% versus 27% is a failure.
Yeah.
right? Because South Africa has a different situation. We have 95% poor people. So unless the majority pays, this is going to be perpetuated.
So then government would tell you that, but that's exactly why we are rolling out a massive smart meter program, prepaid meters, so that we flip around the model where you now pay upfront for the electricity before you use it.
Yes, in principle, yes, but Thabo, there's no such thing as free lunch in business or in government. To acquire the smart meters, there's a capital cost that you need to incur up front. And then you need skills and competencies and leadership, all of that to give effect to that rollout. There are models to address that, off-balance sheet funding and all of that, escrow accounts. But there's no free lunch. Smart meters come at a cost, and it is being rolled out. The private sector is also playing a role in assisting with that. But private sector would need their money. Because private sector, whether you like it or not, and even with our load shedding crisis, and I'm involved with that as well, private sector have one mandate: make profits, maximize profits, and they are ruthless at that. So when it gets to this old scenario, private sector will assist, but there's no free lunch, Thabo.
So you're saying then prepaid meters would not be the solution. How else do we change that structure?
No. I'm not saying that. I'm saying prepaid is the solution.
It would be a prepaid solution, but it would still cost something.
Yes.
Government that we need to put up front. How else do we solve it? 27, 73%. How do we swap around?
Well, you know, the model is, in the South African situation, does the user pay principle work? Is this fiscal framework model that envisaged in 1994, will it work on it? I don't believe it will work. So even with the subsidies, you know, to make up the gaps in the municipal revenues, there are subsidies. And I think private sector has a problem with that as well. But notwithstanding that, it's still not working. So what needs to happen is that maybe it has to be given serious thought where government pays for service delivery from their fiscus on a capital basis and so on. So they run the entire service delivery and take away the user pay model. In other words, I'm very careful, I would say this, I'm not saying that from taxes, but I'm saying that from the collections that you do, it must be run nationally so that service delivery is managed effectively and efficiently, because...
Somebody suggested that, for example, to say there are allocations that are made, right, to municipalities that are supposed to, for example, take care of the electricity infrastructure, and it shouldn't be dilapidated. But because of the situation that you're talking about, 95% of the people living in abject poverty, you name COVID, you name load shedding itself also exacerbating the situation. People just don't have money to pay, right? And so municipalities are not collecting nearly enough. And they take that very same allocation that is meant to fix the infrastructure and use it for somebody else and something else. Now, a suggestion was, why don't that amount be ring-fenced? Say, no, this is electricity money. And as you put it, either be controlled at province or be controlled at national, to say, we are now going to take care of the electricity infrastructure. We are now going to take care of the water infrastructure. Municipalities will no longer take care of that.
I'm glad you raised that. In fact, we were trying to address that about 20 years ago when we tried to create the REDs, the Regional Electricity Distributors model. And let me take a sidestep. Although Eskom is being restructured now, it's an advanced stage, which is good. It brings out the efficiencies and effectiveness of Eskom. But restructuring Eskom alone will not solve the country's problem. We need to restructure the entire EDI, which is being considered now through the NERCOM structures and so on. But we started that process, and I was there in Joburg when I worked at City Power, and I was the project manager for COJ and City Power for the creation of the REDS model. We ran with that model for nine years, I think, plus or minus. Unfortunately, the new government at the time killed that model. So we worked 9 years in it to restructure the municipalities. I mean, there were different models, but we were wanting to create 6 wall-to-wall reds. That, I believe, and maybe it needs to be modified, if that model had been completed, Tabu, to its logical conclusion, implementation, I don't believe we would have the situation now. Now, why I'm saying that, that REDS model was also going to address the infrastructure, right? The physical infrastructure. Now, what has happened, because of that model that started in around about 2000 and failed, municipalities stopped investing in the infrastructure, right? Because they were waiting for the REDS.
Yes.
After 9 years, it collapsed. There's a serious backlog. So now these are numbers I'm going to quote to you, right? Plus or minus, it could be slightly different. There's a backlog of 80 billion rand, 80 billion rand of maintenance and refurbishment backlog alone. It does not include capital investment, and it does not include new infrastructure, 80 billion rand. If you add the impact of load shedding since 2008 on the infrastructure, I could safely double that. So there's a backlog of 160 billion rand of municipality, and I think to a certain extent Eskom distributions backlog, let alone the new infrastructure. So the fiscus is in serious problems. We're going to look at 500 billion for the transmission infrastructure, which we're battling to get.
Sure.
Now we're going to look at 160 billion rand. Our investment climate is not good, right? We are also grey listed. So the private sector has to play a role in a very prudent manner, right? So we are in a serious situation in that, and but we can't sit back and wait.
Former executive manager at Eskom Vally Padayachee with us in the studio. Let's go back to that. The debt crisis, we've been hearing, at least in the last 2 budgets, right? Treasury is saying, no, there's an allocation that is now going to be made, firstly, to relieve the pressures at Eskom, to open up their balance sheet so they can go to markets and get some money to deal with their challenges. But 2, the municipal debt is also being addressed, and there's going to be some debt write-offs and so on and so forth. Why is that not working?
Well, what you're talking about is the National Treasury Debt Relief Program that was done in conjunction with COCTA and other government departments to try and assist this debt challenges faced by municipalities. But again, I go back to there's no such thing as free lunch. So National Treasury, very fundamentally, because this program is quite detailed, what it says is that for municipalities that want to participate in this program, you've got to formally participate in this program, you've got to tick certain boxes. And the conditions are very onerous from National Treasury to participate. One of the serious conditions, which my colleagues in the municipality have problem, is that you could lose your license, your municipal electricity NESA license, if you don't comply with the conditions, okay? And if you comply with that and you tick off all the boxes, then National Treasury will write off aspects of the debt, not the current debt, but the historical debt.
Historical debt,
Now, I'm not sure of the exact number, but a number of municipalities have started participating in that. Some of them have no choice anyway. But it's not working, Tabu. And my opinion is because, for the reasons I mentioned, you are addressing the direct causes and not the root cause. Because if the municipality pays an amount of certain debt, they're still not collecting, and the revenues are still down, and load shedding, we still had them recently. So that problem is going to perpetuate. And hence I say that even Treasury now is also looking at that again with the municipalities on that program. But of course, that program suits Eskom because at least they will get their money back. And Eskom also have taken over some of the municipalities' services in respect of that. But But I'm of the opinion that unless government steps in and addresses this problem holistically, it's going to perpetuate. Because another fact that I'll put on the table, my understanding is that the municipalities owe Eskom about 79 billion rand. 79 billion rand. And that's increasing by a couple of billions every month. Unless government addresses that's going to increase. It's been increasing by 2 or 3 billion rand for the last few months.
Sure.
And so it's a combination of factors that needs to be addressed, the restructuring model, the fiscal framework, all of that needs to be addressed.
Yeah.
And you mentioned about the private sector playing a role. Shall I just talk about that?
Yes,
right.
If you can, the next 2 minutes, so that we can wrap it up.
Okay, so in terms of private sector have been assisting, but they need to play a very balanced, prudent role. In other words, the Munics and Eskom have to be careful that they don't shoot themselves in the foot with the private sector. So I'm of the opinion very quickly that going forward, my opinion, supported by many, that the business model will change. So we'll move from a kilowatt-hour energy business model, commodity model, to a services delivery model. What I mean by that is both the municipalities and Eskom, and we're also having a new market code that's coming in now with a new ERA, etc. But the municipalities and Eskom will continue to own the national grid, so they will provide the highway, the electronic highway. Private sector, in a very prudent manner, again, fit for purpose, will provide the electrons because they have the balance sheet, they have the income statement. So IPPs, etc., will, and there'll be a market to the National Transportation Company where the electrons will be transported through the grid, and there'll be a number of grid services for which they'll have to pay a fee. And this, I believe, will be the survival model for Eskom and the municipalities.
Right.
As long as, for the use of the grid, it'll be cost-reflective and it'll be fit for purpose. That I see the model continuing, as well as the industry being restructured.
Yeah.
And I also believe that in addition to a transmission-driven market code, there should be a distribution-driven market code, a DSO and a distribution wholesale market for the benefit of the utilities. Thabo.
Vally Padayachee, appreciate your time. Thank you very much for coming in this evening. Former Executive Manager at Eskom there with us in the studio.